Damon Edwards, you may know him as the co-host of the DevOps podcast, DevOps Cafe podcast. Sorry about that. It's actually one of my favorite podcasts. He's been a very early influencer in the whole DevOps movement. He was also co-founder of Rundeck and managing partner of DTO Solutions. He's a frequent speaker and writer on DevOps topics, and he spent nearly 20 years in technology, and both in hands-on technology and in leadership on cutting-edge topics in DevOps and SRE. He's very active in the community, both around the entire world. And please join me in welcoming Damon Edwards. Yeah, we'll just give him a second. He's presenting up here off the podium.
Can you hear me now? Yes. All right. My name is Damon Edwards. Thank you for having me. This room is awesome. I feel like there should be like a Broadway musical going on here, but everything is bigger in Texas. So I was asked to speak about SRE, but I wanted to kind of broaden the discussion a little bit, because I think the context of which DevOps and SRE work is as important as the content itself. Now, my title, as I talk about the last mile, I gave a talk last year at the DevOps Enterprise Summit. It was a keynote about how, for all the effort that we put into DevOps, if we don't solve our operational problems, if we don't fix what goes on after deployment, then we're really losing the full value, right? And the last mile comes from the telco industry, where they talk about, all the work you have to do to build value. You don't actually capture it until you make that last connection. And the whole talk was about how there's these forces that undermine operations. Low trust, excessive toil, silos, queues, and the whole thing kind of puts together in a bunch of stories about how these forces interact and undermine what we do on the operations side. And if we don't fix them, then we're really not going to get the value out of our DevOps efforts. You can watch that on YouTube. And it kind of colors what's going on in this talk. And by the way, all my slides, I'm going to post them to my Twitter at Damon Edwards within the hour, so you don't have to take notes on any of these links or anything. And I'll show my Twitter handle again at the end. So SRE, right? Site reliability engineering. It's one of these things that's kind of crept into the DevOps conversation. Like DevOps itself, it sort of started, in the kind of corners with a few of the high-flying web companies. Google really doing kind of a great job of promoting the idea, and suddenly it's been everywhere, right? There's books about it, they're in conference talks, there's a whole conference about it now, right? And, just like kind of in the DevOps world, a lot of questions about, well, what really is it, right? And there's all these different conversations about, well, SRE, it's when you ask software engineers to do operations. Liz Fong-Jones is here, class SRE implements DevOps, right? SRE is next generation cloud native operations, and SREs when ops does more engineering than ops work, right? So, but it kind of doesn't really answer, well, but why? What is this thing really about? And it starts to feel like one of these unicorn things, like, oh, people are just doing it because they want to be like the cool kids, right? So I want to start with talking about why SRE, right? What is this all about? To quote, Simon Sinek, right? You always have to start with why. So to start, I want to start with a story. The story is, let's call it an insurance company. The names have been changed to protect the not so innocent, but it kind of talks about how it feels to do kind of classic operations inside large enterprises, and it starts with an actual incident that, and we'll say it's the $1 million incident that nobody knew really happened, right? So it was just another Thursday, right? And the call center folks are like, wow, our app's not really responding. Call center app's not really responding. It's a web-based app. What's going on here? My browser's timing out. It's kind of intermittent. Sometimes it works, sometimes it wouldn't. Customers start complaining. I can't log into my account. I'm not getting any information here. It barely works. Through different channels, the customers start complaining to the call center agents. Certain VIP customers can go straight to the technical support desk that the call center folks can also go through. And it goes to the service desk. You hear a lot of things about stuff's not working, right? Things like that. And so the service desk is saying, well, hey, but all my monitoring's green, right? What's going on here, right? And then about 3:30 in the afternoon, oh, hey, it starts working again, right? Oh, that's cool. Service desk is like, all right, well, I have no idea what happened there. I'll let somebody know. Who knows if they'll do anything about it, right? Very next day, right? It's Friday morning, 9 a.m. Pacific. Same thing starts happening. The call center agent's like, oh, what's going on here? This thing is taking so long. I'm sorry. Customers with their direct access to the self-service portal, like this thing is, slow, this is broken. You folks shouldn't be in business anymore. And, again, it all starts flooding on the service desk. They're like, but my monitoring's green. But this time they say, well, let's, we got to spin up an incident here. We got to figure out what's going on. They launch the bridge. It's the all-call bridge, right? So, 40 or so people jump on this bridge. It's a whole lot of not me. Wasn't me. And then someone mentions, well, it's probably not the new server hardening processes or the network changes we made. And everyone's like, well, what server hardening process? What are you talking about? And it's like, hey, we were going to fail the audit. Didn't you see the email? Right? Because everybody reads every email in their inbox, right? So, all right, well, let's launch the major incident, bridge. They start the war room at their headquarters. The assistants start ordering lunch. Everybody piles in. There's like, 30 people at this point, right? Everyone doing just to try this, right? Around and around. But next thing you know, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, problem goes away, right? They're like, we have no idea what's going on here. So the theory is it's this server hardening thing that they did, right? Which happened after it wasn't what they tested in development, it wasn't what they did in staging, it was this thing that they did at the last minute to all the servers going into to production. So let's roll back over the weekend, let's spend all weekend rolling back the OS changes, rolling back the network changes. Only about 10 or so people had to do that, but the QA team wasn't involved because they didn't really have a way to test this, right? They didn't have any kind of load tests. So that was their own weekend project, try to figure out, well, how could we actually, do some load tests here? So let's see if it worked, right? Who thinks it worked? Anybody? No? Right, so Monday morning, right? All right, not again, so frustrating, customers hate them, everyone's mad. Still says all green, right? So now it's like, well, we got to get the developers involved. Oh, I forgot, the developers didn't want to show up for the previous bridge because they said, we haven't changed any code, so it couldn't be us, leave us alone. We're in the new building with the cool open workspace, we're locking in some sprints here. We've got our own DevOps engineers. So, they're emailing the lead developers for the customer services, and they're locked in their sprint, headphones on, ready to go, ignoring everything else like they're supposed to be doing. And, finally, incident commanders knock, like, hey, you see that ticket, right? You gonna help us out here? Okay, fine. I'll take a look. I told you before, we didn't change anything, right? So finally, they get together, they powwow, they look at a few different things. They say, well, hey, something's wrong with the database connection here, right? Intermittently, where it's either timing out or it's taking too long. But our code didn't change, so we're going to get back to work. You guys fix whatever you did to your network, right? So the DBA is like, well, we didn't change anything either. We haven't touched this in a while. So there's a new theory, right? Which is it's the database connection, right? And so everybody gets together. By this point, the call center managers are like, hey, how come my call center agents are complaining? They have 1,200 call center agents, by the way. So it's a lot of people who are frustrated. And again, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it all gets better. So very next day, Tuesday, same thing's happening over again. New theory, right? They've gotten closer to, well, something to do with these stored procedures. I think there's a stored procedure problem. We're not sure what exactly it is. The incident commander goes over and says, hey, we've got to get this, the phone support for a database vendor is just not cutting it. We need some better help here. And all they'll do is keep routing us to the same call center. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, we paid for the bronze support because nobody, it's a database. How hard is it? You guys are good at SQL, right? What's going on? So they said, okay, well, we need to launch this for approval to immediate upgrade to the platinum support, get somebody to help us. That goes off into the abyss, right? And fun little interlude about this organization. So they had about 1,200 people in their technology organization. Guess how many distinct approvals ran through their approval system? Things like ServiceNow per year. Anybody? Wild guess? 50,000, right? So 50,000 distinct approvals, each spawning multiple emails. 5, 6, 7 emails goes blasted out in the organization. So do you think anybody was paying attention to, yet another approval for a new support package, right? So So it was a disaster, but luckily, because of their brand name, they were able to convince the vendor on good faith, like, you've got to help us, right? So they agreed, okay, we'll send one of our partners who also wants to get on your business, so that special privilege, we'll send somebody to help you guys out, right? So now it's Wednesday, right? Same problem in the morning, traffic starts gearing up, things start slowing down, no one can figure out what it is, the consultant shows up, everyone's like, let's see what's going on here. Digs around, right? And turns out that comes back 3 in the afternoon and says, hey, somebody toggled on the performance analysis feature. It's been in there for a couple of releases of the database. It's a statistics thing, and it helps you for gathering data for performance. And they were like, so what does that little config change do, right? It's like, well, interesting thing I found out here about the stored procedure you're using everywhere. It's quite popular. It's got over 400 parameters in it, and it's 1 million lines of code. It's the entire business in a stored procedure. Now the developers are like, but hey, it's been working for years, right? So what's the beef? Why is your database broken, right? So it's exciting. So they say, okay, well, we can turn that feature off. Yes. Okay, great. So they go in, they work all afternoon, all night. There's another dozen or so people. They turn the configuration off. Luckily, QA this entire time been working on some load test capabilities. They were able to load test it, and problem solved. 5 days later, right? And so the fun part is the postmortem, right? Which is the VP of Dev versus the VP of Ops. So the Ops people are like, this is ridiculous, right? Like, it's not fixed. You just turned it off, right? And, you better refactor this because it's going to bite us in the ass again, or something else is going to bite us, right? This, we just can't say, don't turn that on, right? We really need to fix that. And the consultant was like, yeah, you should probably fix that, right? So the VP of Dev's like, hey, I hear people complaining. I'm going to do my best here. Hey, I'm told, bug 8543, it's P1, but you keep rejecting it, right? What's going on over there with your developers? And on the developer side, they're like, yo, their change broke it, not ours, right? And we don't have any time for this, right? And so the dev side was like, look, it's not a bug. You already have a fix. You've got your workaround, right? The case closed. And then, of course, all they hear about, it goes up this ladder is, we need more budget, we need more time, we need to delay projects, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, nope, no budget, stay on schedule. Dev wins the argument, right? And the funny part about this is this is not the only thing that went on that week, right? This happened kind of all over the place. And it wasn't until they stepped back and look at it, they realized that the cost of this, right? That it was, about $270,000 in labor, right, to actually get this stuff done. The lost call center productivity of their 1,200 agents was about $620,000. So that's about $890,000 right there, not even including project delays. All those dozens of people who had to be called into things lost, weeks worth of time, plus all the cleanup, plus all the arguing afterwards, plus the brand damage, right? The customer's thinking, how do we trust these people to handle my insurance? They can't run a website, right? So the reality is this is over $1 million that they just took outside in the courtyard and lit on fire, poof, right? But nobody really knew what happened. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, that performance thing, people were complaining about that, sort of. So $1 million gone, right? Well, how do they end up here, right? So kind of break out of story mode here. So first we look at, this is actually the org chart, right? Or kind of a cartoonize the org chart. But, it's very functionally siloed. Everything was, we had a bunch of, we had our centralized UI developers, we had our API services, we've got the kind of black here is the ops, right? And then we got all the different lines of business. They have their own budgets, their own dev teams. And, if you think about how does anything get done here, right? If anything happens, we got the corporate plan, the annual budget, the project plan, the requirements, then it gets blasted out to all these different groups. And, it requires this massive army of project managers to try to coordinate change. And then we've got this change control, team that's trying to, the cab that's trying to make their things are going properly. And it's hard enough to do when we're trying to, work at this quarterly, annual cadence, but it's almost impossible when it comes to, things need to happen quickly and in the moment. And what ends up happening is the whole organization becomes very, very siloized, right? People are working with their own backlogs, their own tools, their own priorities, but nothing lives in isolation, so they constantly have to try to reach other people. And you have all these conflicts between, the working in different contexts, different processes, different tooling, different capacity. And it's a mess. It's very expensive and kind of unnatural way to, well, actually it's very natural, but it feels unnatural when you work in it. So you ask, well, what were they thinking, right? How did they get to this place, right? It's an organization full of smart people. The individual skills on the devs and the ops side of the house was great. They all were kind of keeping up with the latest technologies. They wanted to do the right thing, but how did they end up in this situation? And the reality is, it's part of the history of success. They've been around long enough that they were just doing what everybody else was doing, right? Which was the classic, very much kind of an ITIL influenced way of thinking. And effectively, what happened is, well, you've got these 26 processes, right, in the kind of the ITIL world. Now, I know V4, they call them activities, but still, they're these kind of 26 or so distinct functional areas of excellence, right? And well, you take that into any enterprise, right? And what's going to happen? You say there's these 26 things we have to be really good at, right? So what are you going to do? Well, we're going to put somebody in charge of each of those 26 things and give them a team. And we're going to tell them these are the inputs, these are the outputs, these are the triggers, these are the metrics that you're going to be measured on. Well, what are they going to do with that thing, right? They're going to manage it. They're going to manage the hell out of it, right? They're going to make it the best thing they can do to advance their career. And you end up with 26 little efforts of people that are saying, let's take this area and use our elbows and make sure this is the best possible thing. Except, if you think about it, how does the work actually have to flow? It's got to flow across those 26 silos, right? And then on top of that, well, to make sure it works, we're going to put this group on top of here, and they're going to make sure we have quality, right? They're going to make sure that we aren't doing things that are going to undermine our work. So all of this, basically telling everybody, take these 26 things, put it into your organization, and be great at each of them. It's going to encourage that siloization. How can it go any other way? That's just the way that corporations or enterprise working works, right? And then you have this command and control idea, right? Which is saying that, you have these complex systems. How are they going to control this, right? And, if you kind of go back to your Deming, right, and it's 14 points, number 3 is cease dependence on inspection to achieve quality. If you read into it, it's saying that, look, you can't, in any complex system, and you can't create quality from the outside. You have to build quality into the system. So how could this thing catch up? And Charity Majors, Honeycomb CIO and champion of observability, makes this great. She puts it very succinctly: distributed systems have an infinite list of almost impossible failure scenarios, right? Think about it. Think about that. Turning that little switch to turn the statistics thing on can cost us $1 million, right? Whoever would have thought of that? Whoever would have thought that's a realistic problem? But there it is, right? So how are we going to have this command and control apparatus? It's going to save us. It's going to save us, from these things, right? So at the end of the day, we've got this, where we're working today, which everything is very disconnected. You think about that story, the monitoring. Why was the monitoring always green? Because we had a separate monitoring group, and they were trying the best to catch up, but they didn't have all the information that the other development and operations teams had. The platform engineering team that turned on that statistics monitor because they thought it was a good idea, they didn't have the context of the fact there was a million line stored procedure that might choke on this thing, right? So everybody's working in a disconnected, out of siloed way. So you might ask, is there a different way, right? And a little bit going back in time, a little history lesson here. So Cameron Haight in 2011, he gave this presentation. He was a famous Gartner analyst, and he brought up DevOps. And this is really when we saw this inflection point in the community where the enterprises started to look into what is this DevOps thing all about. And he actually made a prediction that in 2015, 20% of Global 2000 organizations will be doing some DevOps thing, which was a little bit underselling it. But hey, when have you ever heard an analyst actually be correct, right? It's kind of an amazing thing. But he kept talking about ITIL, right? That DevOps is an alternative. The people are not satisfied or not seeing what was promised with ITIL. So DevOps, kind of came on the scene. And at the time, we're like, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? Because how is ITIL and DevOps, in conflict with each other? Or how can DevOps be an alternative, right? And you think about it, like, the DevOps, this is not everything, right? But you got things like the product alignment, right? Horizontal alignment instead of vertical functional alignment, continuous delivery and all that comes with that, shifting left, right? It's like, well, how does that give you a new operating system for your organization? But then along came SRE, and this is where it gets very interesting because it introduces a whole another set of tools, human tools, right? Practices and ideas. And what's interesting, if you put those together, what starts to happen is you realize that this builds an end-to-end, value-aligned, self-regulating system, right? And you see these in organizations that have moved this way. They've taken sort of the DevOps and SRE ideas, driven them through development and operations organizations, align people by these value streams. They build these value-aligned organizations, but also they become self-regulated. They have all the mechanisms built in to build quality controls into their system. We'll talk about those in a minute. And it seems to be working in kind of different ways. And for the cross-functional teams, Adrian came from Netflix. They very much espouse the cross-functional idea. But if you look at Google, there is a dev and there is an ops. In fact, they call their ops SRE, right? But they have these shared responsibility models across all of these ideas. And really, it was the work of John Hall from BMC that really kind of turned me on this idea that DevOps is a deconstructive movement. The companies that have succeeded with these DevOps and SRE ideas, they've torn things down to first principles and rebuilt their organization. And some of those, like we'll use Google as an example, they had the luxury of they started much later in life than a lot of enterprises in the world, so they could build from first principles to start. But the enterprises that are going this direction and be successful are the ones that are really tearing things down and rebuilding how the people work using these ideas. And Adrian, who I threw this in here because I knew he was here somewhere, he had this great talk, DockerCon 2014. He's been talking about this. He's early in on this, about how, I'm paraphrasing him here, that this architecture enables the speed, and speed is the advantage of an organization. And he talks about how microservices and all the new containerization movement, how that really decouples an organization and how fast an organization can move when it's decoupled. The reality is, though, most people are encased in this old-fashioned, kind of very siloed way of working, like the company that I showed before. But if you take these new ideas and you build your new operating model on these DevOps and SRE ideas, you're really getting the people out of the way of the technology, right? You can actually get the full value and the speed that was promised with these technologies by applying these new principles in ways of working. And we're already seeing it happen on the dev side of the house. But now it's time to look at the operations side of the house. So, what is the innovation of SRE? Like, what's so different, right? Because I actually think that SRE is probably the most important thing that's happened to operations in probably 20 years, right? I think the most important happened to the human management and how people work in operations. You could argue the cloud and virtualization was a little bit bigger, but this is important for how we manage our people. So, what makes SRE different than the classic way we used to work is really the principles, right? And there's a great talk, the link's here, that Stephen Thorne, one of Liz's former colleagues at Google, talks about the principles of SRE and what makes SRE so different. And it's really these three principles that are kind of profound. Number one, SRE needs service level objectives with consequences, right? The consequences part being the key one. And what they came up with is this technique called SLOs and air budgets, right? They're really tools for shared responsibility. So SLO kind of sounds a lot like an SLA, but it's different in a few ways. You take the service level indicator, right? Wherever we all get together, business, dev, operations, say this is the mark that matters. We want to be above this in this performance. And what they're saying is everything above that, right, above that level is actually budget. That's time, that's errors, that's delay, whatever it is that we can spend to improve our business. And we shouldn't always just be putting onto operations and say, oh, this is your SLA. You must perform this SLA or else there's a penalty for you. They use it as a shared responsibility model, which says that, hey, if things fall below that service level objective, we blow our air budget, right? Then it's everybody's responsibility. Dev, ops, product, right? They have to realize that we operate software as a business. We don't write software for a business. We operate a software service for our customers, our users. So therefore, that is the most important thing. We have to give this SLO priority, swarm to it, and fix it. A good litmus test is, can you go to the business side of the house and say, I know you wanted this thing by next week, but we've blown our air budget, we're out of control, we have to delay that so we can go and fix this problem. Most organizations, it's like hell you will, right? You're going to fix my thing and fix this other thing and go deal with it. So it's a very interesting idea that there's actual consequences to these SLOs, and the consequences are not on operations. It's everybody's shared responsibility. Second one, SREs have to have time to make tomorrow better than today. This is the whole idea of Toil. Toil is this interesting idea because it's something that we've all felt before, right? But probably didn't have a name for it. And Vivek Rao here has a great description. He says, toil is the kind of work tied to running a production service that tends to be manual, repetitive, automatable, tactical, devoid of enduring value, and scales linearly as the service grows. So kind of unpacking some of those, what's the opposite of toil? Well, it's engineering work, right? And so toil is, it lacks enduring value. Stuff we might have to do it to keep the business going, but we're not actually building enduring value. We're engineering work, we're building enduring value for the company, right? And, toil is rote and repetitive, stuff we have to do over and over again. How many times I have to do the same restart? How many times I have to do the same, X, Y, and Z, right? Whereas engineering work is creative and iterative, right? Toil tends to be tactical, engineering work tends to be, strategic. Toil increases with scale, right? So if we had to scale from, 1,000 users today to 1 million users tomorrow, how many more people do we have to add, right? That's a sign there's a lot of toil in the system versus engineering work enable scaling, right? And toil can be automated, should be automated, the computers can do it, right? Whereas engineering work requires human creativity. So why this is so important is we can get out of balance that, the two things that toil are, that toil can be used for. One is improve the business. It's the time we can use to actually make things better, but it's also time we can use to reduce other toil. And if we let the toil crowd out the engineering work, we get in this kind of bankruptcy mode where we don't have any capacity to improve the business. We don't have any capacity to fight the toil. We're just running at 110% and things are out of control, and the downward spiral is inevitable. And this is a naturally occurring force that as you launch things, there's things we forgot about, there's maintenance things that have to happen, there's problems you might run into, and so toil kind of starts heavy, and we start to beat it out of one system, and then we come up with a new system, and then that starts a lot of toil, and we have to keep going around and around. So this idea that SREs have time to make tomorrow better than today is fundamentally about making sure that things stay in balance, and there's enough time to fight back that toil and make things better. And then last one is SREs have the ability to regulate their workload. This is the whole idea that SREs can say no, or the organization can say no. And an interesting example is, what if handing off the responsibility of going to production is not, handing off to the SRE or operations organization wasn't a right? There's actually a privilege that they can say, well, this thing isn't really ready, or it's a little bit, so we have to wait, or this thing has a lot of variability, a lot of issues with it. So Dev, you're going to run it in production until you get this thing solid, and then we'll talk about handing it off to the operations organization to take care of it. And it's a fundamentally saying, well, can you separate running in production from being run by SRE or ops, right? Now, there's all kinds of systems and tooling and things you have to put in place to make this happen, but it's just rethinking the idea that ops is always the aggrieved party, that when marketing says go, it all rolls downhill, gets dumped on ops at the last minute to fix things. Totally changes the power dynamic, right? So these principles are really what set it apart. If you want to get into the nice thing about SRE is people wrote books about it. There's this great video series that Liz and Seth Vargo did. It's great, very well produced. There's some books. The last one, Seeking SRE, is the non-Google SRE book. I actually wrote a chapter for that. They're all from O'Reilly. So plenty of good books about it. People want to know, hey, where do we start, right? Only a few minutes left, so I'll kind of go through these quickly. But, the first one was, SRE needs SLOs, right, with consequences. And that is probably one of the most fundamental truths of SRE. But that requires a company-wide culture change, which is a pretty hard place to start. I say it's good to talk about that, it's good to push on that, but it might take you a while to bring people around to that kind of thinking. Same way with the idea of the ability to say no, right? That SRE teams have the ability to regulate their workload. That's another company culture change that's very difficult to do. It's a good fight to fight, but I don't recommend that's be the place you start in a big enterprise like our friends we told the story about earlier. But Toil, that's something that everybody can win with, right? And the reason why is because, number one, it's got lots of value independent of SRE. If you just tell people, hey, we're going to get rid of this waste. We're going to get rid of all that repetitive tasks we have to do over and over again so we can focus on things that add value to our organization. That's a pretty winning argument. And our people are our most expensive assets. Like, let's stay out of their way. How do we clear things out of their way to make their work more interesting and it's better for the company? So, there's different ways. Again, I'll post these slides so you can read them. But tracking toil levels for each team is very important. Have a standard set of definitions. Emails, expense reports, that's not toil, that's overhead. Toil is like involved with your actual work. Different styles of tracking. I think the key thing is stay away from the time tracking, the in-the-weeds time tracking. We've seen people use their project managers, their scrum masters as a way to get a general sense for, hey, this is where our time is going, roughly. And the idea is looking at the balance to say, hey, over a given period of time, is less than a certain percentage of our team's work dedicated to this toil. The kind of industry sort of benchmark now is 50%. 50% of our operations-minded folks, 50% of their time should be spent on engineering work versus toil. So setting the toil limits, just talked about that, and then fund the efforts to reduce it. Michael Kehoe and Todd Polino did a great example of a program they put in place at LinkedIn to when things get top-heavy, when you get top-heavy with toil, how to fund the actual program. Because otherwise, everyone just says, oh, look, that's really bad, and they go on to their other work. But they actually, it's a good program they use for actually putting emphasis on making a structured program on fixing the toil. And, different areas to go about it, reducing technical debt, re-engineering processes, and also enabling self-service. How do you empower the people to not have to go through all of the hoops of opening tickets, waiting for someone else to do something for them, asking somebody time and time again to do the same repetitive processes, kind of pushing waiting interruptions on people, taking waiting on themselves. Self-service is a very key way to go about that. And I'm actually going to be out of time, but some anti-patterns that you can spot over and over again, and you can apply this technique to try to get rid of the, hey, fix this, do it again. All the access issues, like, oh, I could do that, but I can't get to it. The dog pile, right? How many times that bridge call of 30 people, somebody says, oh, it's this database over here, and so you log in and you run top, and the first 10 things you see are 10 other people running top, right? All these issues can be solved with kind of smart, runbooks, smart self-service throughout and throughout. The people, I'm an expert, I don't read the wiki. How many self-inflicted, wounds do we have for people like, oh, I've done this restart a million times, and I'll roll out of bed at 3 in the morning, I'll do it again, not knowing I was supposed to pause the monitoring or not knowing I was supposed to use certain flags. Everything blows up. Smart self-service will solve that. So I am out of time. I'm going to be at the Rundeck booth, which is kind of right around the corner there. So if you want to talk more about the self-service, you want to talk more about runbooks, you want to talk about these kind of design patterns that we see in organizations apply, I'll be around there, and I'll be around the rest of the conference. But to recap, let's focus on making tomorrow better than today, right? So number one, beware of the impact of the traditional management structures, right? Use the combination of DevOps and SRE to improve both speed and quality, right? Think deconstructive. How can we get rid of these constraints that are on our organization today and rebuild them from the bottom up? Just to be certain, because somebody out there is thinking that I'm super anti-ITIL. I'm not asking for anarchy, right? I'm just saying there are better ways, and there are, better ways to go about it, and we should rethink how we approach, especially operations. SREs is the new way to think about operations. Don't focus on the shiny tools, or who's doing it. Focus on the principles and kind of how it can be applied to your organization. I suggest be practical. Start by focusing on toil. Get a lot of street cred. Make people's lives a lot better. Save a lot of money for your company. Find and fix those toil anti-patterns. And empowering folks with self-service, with smart runbooks, with the right guardrails that they can go and solve these problems themselves. Get everybody moving and get out of those disaster scenarios like we started with. So that's my talk. I'll put my slides at Damon Edwards within the next hour, I promise. You can always email me if you want to talk, or I'll be around the corner. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Dallas.
Excellent talk. Thank you very much, Damon.